Most people teach their kids how to work for money. I've decided to teach my kids how to make it, but without trading time for it. Now, here's the thing. I want to be clear that I'm in no way diminishing the importance of hard work. I'm simply sharing the lessons that I'm teaching my kids about how to make money so that they can avoid some very common problems that I've seen entrepreneurs have across the board. The fact of the matter is, most people, most of us, most entrepreneurs are taught how to make money wrong. And that's okay. Our parents, our grandparents may have been the ones to teach us about money, but they didn't know about it. For years, I was frustrated because I would learn things about money and I would be like, why didn't my parents teach me this? Why didn't they share this with me? If I would have known this, it would have made things in my life so much easier. But then it took me probably way too long to realize the fact that they didn't know these things themselves. How can they teach me something that they didn't know? And that's really the case. If they knew these things, they would have taught them to us, right? But they didn't know. And that's because a lot of this information is hidden. It's not their fault that they didn't know. It's not your fault if you don't know. It's the fact that a lot of this information about really truly how to make money, how to build a business that can operate without you and still generate income for you and your family is not publicly disclosed. It's not public knowledge. And as a result, how could you or your parents or anybody be expected to know how this stuff works? But what we do know is that when these issues are not addressed, they will cause problems in your business. And they cause problems in your business at all stages of the game. So when you're starting up, these issues with money, this lack of understanding, these things that you don't know, it's going to cause issues for you. When you're building a business and you get to the point where the business itself is making mid to high six figures or even seven figures, you're going to have different issues that come up related to your viewpoints of how you were raised and what you were taught about making money. And so the reason I wanted to make this video is because I wanted to share some of the experiences that has led me to make a very, very conscious decision to teach my kids about different things about money in different ways to understand how money is made. Now, at different stages of the process, let's talk a little bit about the startup entrepreneur and how I'm going to break this down of why I'm intentionally teaching my kids these things. I've got two kids, they're 5 and 7 as of this recording. I'm going to share specifically the breakdown for each stage of business of why I'm sharing these lessons with them and starting so early. What I'm not going to talk about in this video is what I consider the basics of money, which is things like saving money, budgeting money, all these different things. What I'm specifically going to talk about is what I think is the fundamental of those things, which is how we make money and where money comes from. And that is the distinction, and that is the specific lesson that I'm trying to drive home to my kids, because what I see is that a lot of us as business owners and entrepreneurs, at all stages, we have this relationship with making money and how we have been taught and how we believe that money is made. And I think that ultimately it causes us a lot of problems. And so it's specifically the most basic fundamental of how is money made and where does it come from that is the issue that I'm trying to address. So first, let's talk about the types of businesses or the types of entrepreneurs, the type of people that will benefit from this video. And I want to focus on the stage that the business is at, because this issue comes up at various stages. So the first is the startup phase. You're starting in business, you are up to about $100,000 per year. So, maybe your first 2 years in business, your business itself, the top line of the business is making less than $100,000 per year. Now, the way that this issue comes up, what I call an addiction to how money is made. And the reason I call it that is because, like if you've seen TV shows and you see them talk about addiction, right? Like the person who's addicted, they always go back to the source, right? They have like these triggers of like, this is where I'm going to go to get this addiction fulfilled. And we see that. Money is the same thing. Making money is the same thing. So like in the early stages, when you're just starting, when you're starting your business, you're making less than seven figures. you probably have this addiction to where you're like, money is made from working a job. You may still be in this mindset of like, I hope I can make this work. Or people, when you tell them that you've started a business, they may come to you and they may say, hey, I hope that works out, right? There's still this doubt of, is this possible to start a business? Well, a lot of people have started businesses. A lot of people have run businesses. It's very possible. This relationship of where the money comes from is what can be holding you back. And so let me illustrate it this way. There's two entrepreneurs I've met with over the past 2 years that come to mind when I think about this. One of them was a young man. He was about 29, 30 years old. He had a small family, 2 kids, married, nice house, right? Really smart guy. And he was making just under 6 figures per year in the business, right? He'd been in business for about a year and a half, 2 years, and he just was really struggling to break that 6 figure mark. And he and I were talking, we connected on Twitter, he and I were talking, and he's like, hey, this is the service, this is what I offer. I was like, great service. I tested some of the fulfillment with him and worked with him, and I was like, yeah, you do great work, you have a great service, here's the things I would adjust and refine. And he started doing those things, but this was nothing related to his offer or how the business operated. This was strictly a issue with how money was made. And he approached me after a few months and he said, hey, just as a friend, he's like, I'm really struggling. I think that I'm going to have to take this job. He's like, I got a job offer. I've been looking for jobs on the side. I got a job offer and I decided to take this job. And so I'm going to actually close down my business and I'm going to take this job. And he was really just like defeated, right? The past few years he had been building this and he decided to go back to how he was taught money is made, which is working at a job. And he had made his decision and I didn't want to undermine his decision, but I said, hey, I know you pretty well at this point. We've been working together for a while. And I said, let me just share this thing with you to consider. I said, you went out, right? You were telling me about your business. You were selling these services. I had encouraged you to raise the price because the value is there. You were struggling with that. And of all the recommendations I made, I said, that's the one thing you didn't change. You were going out and you were looking for a job in the meantime. I said, with this job that you guys said, what are the things that you're going to be doing? And he said, well, basically, he said, it's the same things I've been doing, right? It's the same types of services I've been offering in my business. It's just that I'm going to be working for one company and they're going to pay me, it was a $120,000 a year salary. And I said, I thought that was probably the case. I said, let me just throw this out there to you. I said, basically what you did is you went out and you sold yourself and your skills and your ability to get this job. I said, and you were pitching and you were selling yourself, right? You call that applying for jobs and sharing your resume. But what you really were doing is you were really pitching your skill set and pitching the services that I encourage you to raise the price on for $120,000, right? Because that's the salary that you're going to be getting. I said, now you're dependent on one client, one person for that $120,000. I said, but you see that the services that you were offering had price elasticity. You could have increased the price basically tenfold because he was charging like $10,000 to $12,000 for the services that he was rendering. And I said, you really need to up the price because of all the things that you're doing. And I encouraged him to up the price to at least $30,000. And when he was going out and pitching and finding jobs, he actually ended up selling the same services, right? For $120,000, but just for one company. Now, the thing that blows my mind about this is that this is the exact same process. To me, it's the same process, right? Like if I'm going out and I'm talking to people and I'm selling a done-for-you service, I'm offering to use my skills to work for that company. So if that's the case, and I'm offering to use my skills to work for that company, I'm exchanging my skills and my services for money, right? And I was able to go out and I was able to pitch to one company that I would do those things for them for $120,000 per year. To me, that just tells me that like I could have very easily gone out and found, 5 of these companies with the same process, the same vigor, the same, um, the same, basically the same process, just positioned differently of like, hey, instead of me working for you for 120,000 per year, I don't think that you need that. You don't need me full time. Why don't I just do them for you part time as a contractor or a subcontractor for 30 to 60,000 per year? And I think we can do everything that you need done, right? And you do that 3 or 4 or 5 times. You're then making more than just working for one company, and you're not dependent on that company, right? So this lesson really showed me that like when things get difficult, instead of looking at it from that vantage point, he looked at it and he said, I'm going to go back to what I know of how to make money, which is working for somebody and not working for myself. But now what he's done is he's put himself in a position where he's dependent on a single client. And I just said, when in the future, if you ever consider working for yourself again, I strongly advise you to take this under consideration. And that's because his income was very dependent on this thought of like, if I need income and it doesn't work, I can always go back to finding a job. And that's what he ended up doing. And so this addiction to how we make money is very ingrained. And that's one way that it applies to startup entrepreneurs. So my point here is, if he had basically broken that and he had said, the way you make money is you go out and you provide value in the form of services in exchange for money to these companies, right? And basically, if he had broken that and thought, what I'm doing with finding this job, going out to find a job and interviewing, is the exact same thing I should be doing with my business, which is going out and finding potential clients with basically using the same process, right? Going out and finding potential clients and having these interviews with them and basically selling them on myself and selling them services subcontracted out instead of working for them as an employee. I need to just close this business that's making almost $100,000 per year and go out and find a job. He sacrificed, 120,000. He made the sacrifice to go out and make $120,000 per year before taxes, which ultimately is going to end up putting him in the same position as he was in before. The difference is that he's now stuck. He's now dependent on that other person to make sure that he's getting money. Now, maybe that's what he wants. Last I heard from him, he said that after about 1.5 years, that job didn't work out. He ended up losing that job and was kind of back in the same position of starting over, looking for business and doing it himself. But this time the problem is he didn't have that $90,000 foundation that he would have had before. If he would have done what I'd recommended before and had that foundation, he would have been able to take the same process and build on top of it and probably be making 180, 190,000 per year for doing the same thing that he was doing by looking for a job, right? But now he's starting over. So that's one example of how in the early stages of business, when you're making less than 6 figures, when you're in what I consider that startup stage, how this income addiction rears its ugly head and causes you problems and makes it so that you basically have an excuse of why your business doesn't work, right? You've got your out. The second person that this applies to and why I think this is important is the other entrepreneur I referenced earlier, which was, he was in a similar state, but he was further along. He was making more like $250,000, $300,000 per year in his business. But as he had kind of broken past that threshold and was making more than what he was making and living off of before, his problem was that he continued to increase his living expenses with it. And what he didn't realize is that economies tend to shift. Since the early 2000s, I guess my opinion on this would be, and I don't have hard data to back this up, I think that we tend to see economic shifts in about 5 to 10 year cycles. As the economy shifts again to be a worse economy or a better economy, that it could have an impact on the profitability of his business. And so his business was making money, but as his business was making money, he was stuck working more in the business. And as things shifted and markets changed and the economy shifted, he was finding it harder and harder to keep that up and to get clients, and he had copycats, and he had people that were making it harder for him to make the sales, and it was becoming harder for him to make the sales. As a result of this, as a result of him increasing his cost of living with that, he had no flexibility. When you look at income coming into a business, you have unearned income, which is like the profit of the business that flows through to you. And then you have earned income. This is the money that you're working for in the business. This is the salary or the payment that you're taking as a result of you trading your hours and working in the business. This is the earned income. This is what you would have to pay somebody if you weren't doing the work. So as a result of not understanding the separation between earned income and unearned income and needing more earned income, he ended up in the cycle of being stuck in the business, working more hours, wearing more hats because he couldn't afford to pay somebody to do the work. And as things in the business got harder, he was having a harder time keeping more of what he made. And this doesn't just happen up to like $250,000, $300,000. This happens, I've seen it happen to companies where they're making, one guy I talked to at a conference years ago, this might be the highest I've seen it, but he was making $2.1 million top line revenue in the business, and he was keeping less than $5,000 in that business. It was basically costing him just as much to run the business as it was it was costing him more money to run the business basically than what he was actually keeping. And so all of these things come from a lack of understanding about how money is made and a lack of understanding about where you go to make money. So here's what I did differently with my kids, because aside from the fundamentals of balancing working for money and working in your business for making money, and how you manage that money and what you do with it and how you spread it out and how you distribute it, and the difference between business income and personal income and all those different things. Besides all of those things, I think that the first thing you have to look at is when things change and when I need to make income, what do I do and how do I make that? And so the nuance here is that I'm specifically trying to teach my kids how to have a dependence on unearned income, which is income that comes again in the form of profits for a business, or unearned income is things like income you make from dividends from stocks that you own, or basically it's income that you get from ownership, but it's not connected to your time. And so here's how I started to teach them about this. And this was like when my wife and I were talking about how are we going to teach the kids about money. The initial thought is like, hey, have them do some chores and have them make some money. The problem is that causes that, hey, when I need income, I need to go work for it. And then what that causes is because I just worked for it and I worked really hard, I deserve something nice. I deserve to spend this money on something that I want because I worked hard. That's the psychology that comes from that. And that cycle creates this addiction to, if I need more money, I just work. But you can only work so much. And it's like Warren Buffett said, if you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you're going to work until you die. I want to be very clear. I am not endorsing not working for money. I am not endorsing not working hard. I'm not saying you shouldn't be willing to do manual labor. I absolutely think that you should. I think that working hard is extremely important. I think that being willing to work hard for longer than other people in business is essential, especially in those startup stages. However, the problem that we're trying to address here is this addiction to money. And so what I decided to do with my kids is I decided to teach them first, basically to teach them this foundation of money coming through investing. Now you could do this with anything. I chose to do it with stocks and with dividend stocks. So specifically what I did is I gave each of I opened up a brokerage account under my account and gave each kid $100 and we put it in a single brokerage account. And we just did that for liquidity reasons, right? Like there's not a whole lot you can do with only like $100, right? But I showed them a list of stocks and I showed them what the companies do. I basically showed them in as simple terms as I could, you're letting this company borrow your money or use your money. You're getting this stock that you hold, and this stock that you hold gives you the rights to some of the profits. We invested in these stocks, these dividend stocks, and there were a couple that were not dividend stocks. We put this in the account, and I showed them the money. I showed them the account. I showed them everything. I showed them my account so that they could understand what they were trying to get to. And then I told them, like, what we're going to do is we're going to check these, and these are one of the main ways that you would make money. And so they got the concept, right? Big picture, they got the concept. And the way that I know that they got the concept is because when they wanted something, right? Or when they wanted to do something that required money, instead of asking, hey, can I have $5? Or hey, can I do some chores to make some money? They would ask, hey, how are my stocks doing? Right? It was really funny to see the look on other parents' faces when, all the kids are asking for money, and my kids are coming up to me and saying, hey, I want to get this. How are my stocks doing? And what I taught them is that seed amount, that $100 that we put in, that was the money that was used to make money. So we didn't want to touch that. We didn't want to reduce that amount. In fact, we wanted to grow it. But if we did need to take some of the money, we could take some of the money that was made from the profits, right? Some of the dividend from that. And that was what we could use to spend. And so what they would do is they would come over and they'd say like, hey, we want $1 or $2 or $5. And they would say, my son especially would say, how are my stocks doing? He was way more interested in it. And I would say, well, let's look. And I'd pull up my phone, we'd pull up the account, and I'd say, hey, so today you've made 31 cents, right? Or today you've made, the stocks have increased in value and you made $1, but you've had, 45 cents in dividends, right? And I would show them the increasing value of the account. And I would basically say, hey, if you want to, like, let's say that the account now has $235 in it, right? I would say, okay, so together between the two of you, you have, let's just for round number say $30. You've got $30 between the two of you. So that's $15 each that you can use to spend this. What I've found is that this teaches them, one, that money can come from other things beyond just working. It can come from ownership. And so they'd see like, okay, well, we have $15 that we can spend. Do we want to spend this, or do we want to wait until it grows and we get more money? Sometimes they're like, we just want to spend it. And I'm like, that's fine, right? And I'm not selling the stock or, selling things like to, take it out of their account. Once in a while I have done that, but I don't do it every time. What I'm doing is I'm leaving it in there, but sometimes, like one time they each wanted $10. And so in that case, because it was a larger amount of what they had made, I took the $10 out of the account, put it back into my account, and I gave them the $10 to spend on the thing that they wanted, right? But the point is that the focus of what they're doing, it helps them to understand that if you're relying on this unearned income, you don't want to take the amount of money that is the seed for this. You don't want to basically kill the goose that lays the golden egg. It teaches them that they need to be patient and that unearned income takes time, but it may not take their effort. Now, once they had this foundation, and once they had this focus of saying, it took about, I want to say maybe 3 to 6 months. Each month, we would look at the amount of dividends that they had made, and we would look at how much the stocks increased or decreased in value, and how much of that was realized versus unrealized. Again, I'm not at this age expecting them to understand that. But the point is we would look at it together so that they would know where they stood. A lot of times they would say, hey, I just want to leave it. I want to leave it there. I don't want to use that money. And once they got that, and once they kind of saw, like, instead of saying, hey, can I do some chores, or hey, can I have some money? Once I established that this is the foundation, in your brains, these are the lessons I'm trying to teach you, then we added in, hey, now you can do some chores, and for some of those chores that you're working for, we'll give you some money for those chores. And so that is how I'm teaching them the balance of how money is made and how I want them to make money. Now, one of the main reasons that I'm teaching my kids this and why I took this approach is Do I think that being a business owner, being an entrepreneur, being an investor is the best way to make money? Do I think personally that it's the best opportunity that's out there? Personally, I absolutely do. But I don't want them to have to do it if that's not what they want to do. My son is very convinced that he wants to be a builder, whether he builds as an employee working for somebody at a company, and that's what he wants to do. I very much want him to be able to do that. My daughter, I think, wants to be a mermaid. So, like, I don't know what that pays. But actually, if you ask her, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? She's like, I want to be an artist, right? I don't think that that typically pays very well while you're alive. So, my point is, I'm doing this and I'm teaching them this way early because I want them to have a foundation by the time they're 18, 19, 20 years old, 25, 30. I want them to have a decent amount of money from good money habits. And my belief is that this will allow them to do work that they want to do, and it will allow them to enjoy what they do for a living. If my son decides to go work for a company building, and that's what he wants to do, I want him to be able to work hard and enjoy the work and be able to focus on his craft and be able to focus on becoming a better builder and being a skilled builder. And I think that that comes from loving the work. I think that if he's focused on that because he's not focused on, I've just got to do this because I have to make the money and I have to make ends meet this week, then personally, I feel that that is better and will help him to enjoy that more. Same for my daughter. If she wants to be an artist and that's what she ends up wanting to be for her entire life and that's what she wants to go into, I want both of them to be able to understand how to make money through investing so that, again, they can enjoy the work, so that they can work for the sake of the work, for the enjoyment of the work, for being able to do what they love instead of having to do something because they need it to make money, because they have this scarcity and they're worried about making money, or not being able to do the job or the work that they want to do because they need to do something else to make money. That's why I'm teaching them that. I'm not trying to help them get set up financially so that they don't have to work. I'm trying to teach them lessons that I think are important to making money and helping them to set a foundation because I want them to work, but I want them to work for the sake of work, for the enjoyment of the work, because work, in my opinion, is what we were designed for. It's something that's very enjoyable. You know, seeing something that you built, seeing something that you made is very enjoyable. But over time, whether we're working for somebody, we're an entrepreneur, whatever it is, sometimes that joy can get sucked out of it because we have to make it work. And we lose the joy of the thing that we once loved. And my dad didn't teach me a lot of good things about finance. And that's because my dad doesn't understand much about finance. And that's not his fault. He didn't have anybody to teach him, and he was never curious enough to figure out how it worked. But one of the things that he did tell me that stuck with me was, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And my dad, while not having a lot of money, he did love what he did. For me, I love what I do, but I love it less when there's financial hardship. And so these are the lessons that I've learned about money that I wish I would have learned, because I think it would have saved me a lot of stress. I joke about this all the time. You see my very premature gray hair. It's gray for a reason. Many of the reasons are related to hard lessons that I had to learn about money and finance that probably, I'd say each of these gray hairs are probably a financial lesson that I've had to learn. I've still got the beard to go, so I've got more financial lessons to learn, I guess. But my point is, these are important lessons that I've learned through my career. This is the way that I've decided to engineer teaching these lessons to my kids. And if you are a business owner or entrepreneur that is, one, trying to make your business work, you're in those startup stages, and you're looking at it and saying, well, if it doesn't work, I can go back to working for somebody else, Hopefully this gives you a mindset shift about where money comes from. I think even more so if you're in that stage where your business is making money and you're making money, but even though it's making money and you're making money, you're still not keeping enough of the money that you're making, and you're working harder to make that same amount of money or the money that you need, working harder, working more hours, and you're stuck working in the business. My goal is that there can be some lessons and some takeaways from this video that help you to overcome some of these things about how money is made. And the key takeaway I'd say here is understanding that you've got earned income, which is money that you work for the job that you're doing, for the skill set that you have. You have unearned income. This is money that you get for ownership, but is not like ownership of the company, the net profit, right? That's unearned income. Dividends from stocks, dividends from your company, that's unearned income. That's money that you get from ownership. The focus should become on how do I decrease my personal spending and my business spending to create more of an income gap? How do I start to become more dependent on the unearned income so that I am not dependent on the earned income or stuck and gridlocked in needing to make more money and work harder, and I end up creating a job for myself and getting stuck working in my business, right? This is not just a cash flow problem. This is a fundamental belief problem that I've had to overcome. Most entrepreneurs, as they're growing their business, at some point have to overcome if they want to have some freedom and not be enslaved to the business that they've built. So, core takeaways: learn the difference between making money and keeping money, prioritize unearned income streams, work hard, but don't rely on hard work alone. And the reason for this is because the goal is not just making a lot of money, it's also freedom. People who have a lot of money, what they want is time. So at a certain point, you realize that the time has a greater value than the money. But hopefully this video has helped you. We can discuss this and improve how we teach our kids about money and how money is made, and ideally create a better financial future for ourselves and for our children. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe. If you like this type of content and other content related to business and business lessons, hit subscribe. Follow me on LinkedIn and X. Still can't get used to calling it X, but I'd love to share these lessons and help other people to basically learn from the lessons that I've had to basically pay for with a lot of stress and everything in business. But again, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I will see you in future videos.